All jurors and alternates have returned to the courtroom. People versus Robert Durst. Mr. Durst is present with Mr. DeGuerin seated near him. Mr. Chesnoff is present. And Mr. Henderson is at counsel table. All his colleagues are in the jury, what would be the jury box, in our reconfigured courtroom. Mr. Henderson, you'll back up a space or two on that videotape, and we'll resume the examination of Detective Michael Struk.
So I'm playing people 57, day 3. I've gone back about 20 seconds.
We're at 24 minutes and 43 seconds.
All right, thank you.
Have you had any conversations with the defense? Anybody on the defense team since you left court?
Yes.
Who have you spoken to?
Mr. DeGuerin called me
And when did he call you?
about a week ago.
And can you tell me, what did the two of you discuss?
He said to me that when he has an opportunity to examine me again, he's going to ask me questions in my chronology. And he said, can we discuss that? I said, well, I don't have it at that point. So he then asked permission to send it to me, which he did. And
How long did you talk to Mr. DeGuerin?
it was twice. On the initial, when he had asked me whether or not he could ask me questions on my chronology, it was a fairly brief question. About a day or two later, I received an overnight package containing those documents, which was my memo book and the chronology. And then we spoke again this past weekend. He had called me.
And how long did you speak this past weekend?
15 minutes.
And the subject of your conversations was this last one.
This last
Yeah,
what do you mean the last 15 minutes when we spoke 15 minutes?
The last conversation you had.
Yeah, there were several questions that he brought my attention to as to what I had written in my memo book or the chronology or whatever, and he asked me, do I recall it, and did I think what I wrote was accurate? That was it.
So, Detective, do you agree that you knew from your first interview with Mr. Durst that he told you that Kathie got on a train at the Katona station, correct?
Yes.
And Katona is Katonah. And would you agree that it's kind of standard operating procedure as an investigator that when you are investigating a missing person or a missing person you believe has been the victim of foul play, that you're going to go try to find the last place that they were at?
The last place I thought she was at was 37 Riverside Drive.
So, let me ask you something, Detective.
Yes.
You had Bob Durst telling you that Kathie Durst got on this train, correct?
Yes.
Would you agree that Kathie Durst back then was an attractive woman?
I guess you could say that.
And someone who was somewhat striking in appearance, somebody noticeable. Would you agree?
You could turn it that way. I don't. I never had a real opinion as to, I mean, she was, I guess she was attractive. Yeah.
Okay. And would you agree that the train line on a Sunday night going from Westchester into the city, would you agree that that's going to be a pretty uncrowded line?
It could be. I don't know.
Well, Detective, isn't that something that you should know?
There's a lot of things I should know, but I think, I do the best I can.
So when you went back and talked to the employees on that train, what did they tell you?
I didn't speak to anybody on the train.
When your detectives that were working for you went back to speak to the individuals on that train, What did your detectives report back?
I don't know if anybody did.
As far as you know, did anybody go back that was working for you or yourself to interview either
I don't recall, no.
on train?
Okay.
I didn't get them.
If you're asking me, I'm sorry, just ask it again, please.
As far as you know, detective, did you or anyone working for you, New York Police Department, go back and attempt to interview either passengers or employees who would have been on that train?
No.
Detective, did you at any point at that time attempt to ascertain how crowded that train coming out of Westchester County, Katona, on a Sunday night heading to the city would have been?
I don't know how proud it would be, but sitting here 35 years later, I probably would think that we never pursued that based on the fact that we were pretty comfortable that she did arrive in Manhattan. And she was there.
Detective,
Yeah.
you testified previously, last time you were in court, that although your original belief was that she went to Manhattan, within weeks, and certainly within a month, you in fact believed that she had never made it out of Westchester. Do you recall testifying to that?
I don't recall answering that.
So, detective, when is it, in terms of a time frame, that you ended up deciding or coming to the conclusion that very likely, in your opinion, Kathie Durst did not make it into Manhattan?
I don't recall the exact time frame when I felt, or anybody felt at that point that she never made it in. Specifically the day or the time.
Well, detective, I'm asking you, how far into your investigation approximately was it? Was it not until the end? Was it early? When was it that you ended up coming to the opinion, as the lead detective of the case, that Kathie Durst never made it into Manhattan? When was that?
I just don't recall the exact time that I would have, or the incident, going back, it's been a long time, exactly when I felt more firm that she didn't get in. Like I said, I keep going back to Cooperman, but when I felt at some point that maybe that could have been an error, I know sitting here today after all these years, I thought that was much later down the road.
And what I'm asking you, detective, you testified last time that it was within weeks or a month that you ended up believing, you know what, I don't think she made it into Manhattan. Are you saying, do you agree with that, disagree with that? What is your position?
Mr. Lewin, if I said in my prior testimony that maybe it could have changed my mind at that point, or thinking different, I don't really remember saying that, and I don't know why I would have felt that way that early on. Otherwise, all the activity within the chronology, and there were several hundred, I don't recall anything that would say, no, she never made it in. Then it would have made the train ride more relevant. We always operated under the fact that she did get in.
So, detective, so you viewed any information about capturing the train to be irrelevant and not pertinent, is that correct?
Less important. Less important. It would be, why would we be going back up into the train really at that point with the personnel that we had, if we felt that she didn't make it in?
So if we were in Najami
Please don't interrupt the witness. He hadn't finished his answer and you began your question.
Well, I thought
That's hard for our reporter.
Didn't Gilberta Najami tell you, detective, very early on, didn't she ask you to go back and investigate whether or not Kathie had made it on that train?
I don't work for Gilberta Najami. Okay? Whatever Gilberta Najami did as to whether she went on a train or not, she did it on her own.
Well, detective, it would appear, although you don't, quote, work for Gilberta Najami, you would agree, was very interested in trying to find out what happened to her friend Kathie Durst. Would you agree?
No question.
And detective, would you also agree that she came to you and said, listen, Kathie never made it into New York, correct? Into Manhattan.
And what am I to do with that?
So,
That a civilian who went on a train on one particular night was going to determine, with all we knew or believed at that time, that Kathie Durst never got on that train? I mean, come on.
detective, you answer the question I'm asking you.
I did.
No, you did not. Here's my question. Listen to the question. Detective, did Gilberta Najami come to you and tell you within the first couple of days of Kathie disappearing, saying to you, Detective Struk, Kathie Durst never made it into Manhattan. Bob Durst killed her in Westchester. Did she tell you that, yes or no?
I recall Gilberta Najami telling me about a train, that she had gone on the train, but telling me that she knew specifically that Bob Durst killed anybody? I don't remember that.
So you don't remember Gilberta Najami repeatedly telling you, detective, that
Her
Bob...
suspicions? I'm sure she had suspicions.
Listen to my question, detective. Did Gilberta Najami repeatedly tell you, from the beginning of your investigation, Detective Struk, Bob Durst killed her. He killed her in Westchester. She never got on the train. Did Gilberta tell you that? It's a yes or a no question.
She may have. She may have because she was, like you say, she was very concerned about Kathie and because I think the domestic violence and whatever. But for her at that point telling me anything about what she thought, that what in her mind what she thought he did or did not do was really not something that we could go chasing another red herring when the fact that we thought we had her in the city.
Detective, again.
So we keep going back over that.
Detective, listen to my question.
Okay.
You just said she may have told you that. Are you telling me, as you sit here today, you don't have a clear memory of Gilberta Najami repeatedly telling you Bob Durst killed Kathie in Westchester, she never made it to Manhattan?
Mr. Lewin, Najami always, from the beginning, had a suspicion against Mr. Durst. Constantly.
Did she tell you, did she repeat the words I just said to you, detective, from the beginning of your investigation, which was, detective, Bob Durst killed her? Did she say that?
And she may have said it 1,000 times.
Detective, it's not she may have said it 1,000 times, correct? It's she said it 1,000 times, but your position was, I don't care what Gilberta Najami thinks, I don't work for her. Correct?
She doesn't work for me, and I don't work for her.
So is what I just said correct or incorrect?
I guess it's correct to a degree that she certainly had a very firm opinion, but it wasn't supported by anything specific. There was still no crime scene. We still didn't have Kathie's remains or anything like that. So how much stock do I put in Gilberta, who I know in her heart was concerned that Mr. Durst had something to do with it, but so I'm not, my squad command is not going to be sending a legion of detectives out because Gilberta had this notion that he did something to her, whether he did or not.
So next, let me understand something.
Yeah.
Your position is that Gilberta Najami is telling you that Bob Durst killed Kathie Durst in the South Salem house. And your response is, but I didn't have any evidence there's no body, there's no crime scene. That's what you just said, correct?
She never told me he killed her in the house. I don't recall her telling me specifically he killed her in the house.
Detective, you previously responded that there was no crime scene. Do you recall saying that about what DeGuerin said? Do you recall that?
Yes, we never had a crime. We never had an actual crime scene.
You have testified that you had no crime scene with respect to the South Salem house and Gilberta's statements, if she made them, that a crime occurred there. Do you recall that?
Yes.
All right. My question to you is, would you agree, Detective, that even if there had been evidence in that house of Bob Durst killing his wife, Kathie, because you never searched it, do you agree you would know?
That's true. If the crime occurred in the house and it wasn't searched, well, yeah, then we would never know.
Do you agree, Detective, that it was a mistake on your part not to ask Bob Durst for consent to search the South Salem house?
I don't consider it a mistake. I call it a choice that we made in unison at the time. And it was based on apparently the troopers that were present on the scene, the information that was received from the trooper who had entered the premises, and that's where that choice was made. Do I remember the full context about everything that was said that night, 35 years ago? No, I do not. But I would like to think that a bunch of veteran detectives who were there at that time, if we had any kind of a sniff or thought that something had gone down in there, we would have gotten a search warrant.
Detective, even if you didn't get a search warrant, why didn't you ask Bob Durst to search the last place other than the Potomac train station that he said he saw his wife?
I do not know, sitting here today, why I asked him anything or did not ask him anything. I think that's really a tough question to ask me all these years later as to why, and if I may. Very early on, even when certain things were coming to surface as to domestic violence or her use of drugs or being with unsavory people, it was part of our strategy at that time was really not to confront him.
So, Detective, your position is that you made the tactical choice not to ask him for consent to search his house, correct?
I will say yes, but I don't recall all the reasons exactly why we did not obtain a search warrant that night.
So again, I understand you didn't obtain a search warrant that night.
Right.
But Detective, at a certain point in your investigation, you have testified that you came to believe that Kathie Durst never made it into Manhattan. Is that correct?
I don't know when that belief was established.
Detective, so listen to my question. I'm going to ask you when it was. I want you to assume that, because you testified to this, that you came to that conclusion. Is that correct?
Probably way down the road.
Okay. Way down the road, though, during your investigation, correct?
You know something? It could be way down the road in investigation. I don't know, it may have been even after I retired.
Detective, you previously testified, and I played audio clips of you saying that very early on in the investigation, you believed that Bob Durst killed his wife. Do you recall testifying to that?
I certainly thought that there was a possibility of that.
Well, Detective, that's not what you testified to. What you testified to, again, if you were changing your testimony, you testified that you came to believe early on in your investigation that Bob Durst was responsible for the disappearance and death of his wife. Do you recall testifying to that?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So, Detective, that was an opinion you came to during your investigation, correct?
Yes, but how does that plug back into South Salem again? I think that's where you're trying to lead me to, and I don't know if that's fair and accurate at this point.
Well, Detective, number one, I would like that you just answer my questions and not try to figure out where it is I'm going.
So, What Mr. Lewin was suggesting is that rather than imagine where he might be going with his question, simply listen to the question and then answer. I would have put it differently than Mr. Lewin, but I think it's about
I feel like I answer the question the best I can, and then Mr. Lewin keeps reinserting it over and over and over again. I'm doing the best I can after all these years.
I know, no,
I have no agenda with either side.
I know that, but this is only because of our own court rules as far as how you might go about asking the question. There are some answers that you'd like to give that are beyond the question, but the other party, of course, will doubtless fill that out because it's in their interest to do so. So you'll give a full story when you're by operation of direct and cross-examination.
Detective, so you testified that at a point in your investigation, you came to the opinion, your testimony, that Bob Durst was responsible for the death and disappearance of his wife. And I'm not asking you right now when that was. You're just going over your testimony that, in fact, is a foundational question to my next question, a foundational point, that you did come to a conclusion that you testified to during your original investigation that Bob Durst was responsible for the death and disappearance of his wife. So that is to answer my question.
I don't recall coming to a conclusion, using your word, that he definitely did. I mean, I'm sitting here all these years later. I still have had, I am not aware of any evidence that was conclusive that he killed her. Otherwise, he'd have been in handcuffs a long time ago.
Said, listen, I guess. What you testified to the other day was you said that you came to the conclusion as an investigator, the opinion as the investigator on the case.
Yes, sir.
That Bob Durst,
Opinion, I think, is what we discussed. That was my opinion that I felt a lot stronger, yes, about him as we went forward.
Okay, please wait for the question now. Go ahead.
you came, detective, you came to the opinion during your investigation that Bob Durst was responsible for the disappearance of his wife, correct?
Didn't I just answer that?
Please answer it again, even if you haven't. He may ask you the same question 2 times on cross-examination, or even 3.
Did I come to the conclusion?
That's not what I asked you. Listen to my question again.
Yeah.
Listen, detective. I'm using your word now. Did you, during the course of your investigation, come to the opinion that Bob Durst was responsible for the disappearance and death of his wife?
Yes.
Detective, when you came to that opinion, did you immediately have the South Salem house taken apart and searched brick by brick?
No.
Detective, is it your opinion that what Gilbert and Ajami was doing out there, trying to interview people on the train, that was not your job? Is that your opinion?
It's my opinion that Roberta Najani did what she did of her own free will because of her own beliefs, but I did not think it was relevant to our case at that point, believing that Kathie Durst had made it into Manhattan.
So, detective, at the point in time where you came to the opinion that Kathie Durst had never made it into Manhattan, as you testified to last time, that whatever had happened to her had happened, you believe, in Westchester County. Do you recall that testimony?
Yeah, but I think that was much later. I mean, I may have even been retired at that point when I came to those conclusions. Yeah, based on the subsequent state police investigation. In hindsight, there's a lot of things I wish I had done, years ago.
So, detective, when I asked you a question last time about your conversation with the media, and you were asked, you told the media, and the quote is in essence, that from the beginning, I thought that Bob Durst was responsible. Are you now saying, you know what, that's not what I believe?
No, later on, I believe I always suspected that he had something to do with it. And it's not until much later on when other things emerged in the case or whatever, if I'm asked by the media after I retired, certain facts that had came about, yeah, I would have said at that point, gee, I wish we would have done that then. But what I did then was operating based on what I knew and the facts that I had and what we were gathering and going forward with.
So, detective, as it sits right now, even today, other than Gilbert and Johnny, other than her conversations with people on the train, do you have any idea whether anybody recognized, remembered Kathie being on that train that night?
No.
And you would agree, detective, that the only work that you're aware of that was done during your entire investigation to find out whether Kathie was on that train was done by Gilbert and Johnny?
That's correct.
And it's also your opinion that you believe that that was, in essence, a waste of time and not pertinent?
At that time, yes.
Do you still believe that today?
Why not?
I don't know if that's an answer, Dick. Do you still believe that today, yes or no?
Yeah, I still believe that at that time it was a waste of time because we still had Kathie coming into the city.
So, detective, you had a task force of approximately 10 detectives working on this case, and you're telling me that you believe it would have been a waste of time to simply have a detective go to those train employees, go to that train, pass her picture around, and find out, hey, did anyone see her on the train that night? It's your position that would have been a waste of time and not pertinent?
I'm not saying it would be a waste of time. I think that sounds very callous, but at the time it did not seem necessary based on the fact that we believed we had her in the city.
And detective, when you're determining, you speak correctly, as a homicide detective, you are trained that you do not rush to conclusions. You investigate all avenues because you want to make sure that if it turns out you missed something, that you covered your bases. Do you agree that's how you're trained?
Yes, that's a fair statement. You do what you can.
Detective, you've already testified that there were 3 things that you did not do. One was you did not ask Dr. Cooperman the specific questions that I have recited today. Is that correct?
My answer to you was that I was convinced he spoke to her.
So, detective, you've already testified, correct, that you did not ask Dr. Cooperman those questions regarding his familiarity with Kathie Durst's voice, how many times you talked to her on the phone, etc. Do you recall that testimony?
I recall that testimony.
So, detective, do you also recall previously testifying that you were aware that Bob Durst had lied to you regarding the status of his marriage, whether it was a good marriage or bad marriage? Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you recall testifying that you were aware within the first few days that Bob Durst had lied about what he did after he eventually dropped Kathie off at the train?
I believe so, yes.
And detective, you've also previously testified that at some point during your investigation, you testified that you came to the opinion that Bob Durst was responsible for the disappearance of Kathleen's wife, correct?
That was my opinion, yes.
And finally, do you agree, you previously testified that you came to the opinion that whatever Bob Durst had done to Kathie Durst had happened, you believe, outside of Manhattan, and in your opinion, likely in Westchester?
I don't recall the context of when I said that. I'm trying to answer your question the best I can.
So the last part is during your original investigation, at a point in time during that investigation, you came to the opinion that whatever Mr. Durst had done to Kathie Durst, you believe had likely taken place at the South Salem House in Westchester, correct?
I don't know if I answered it that way. I thought my answer was that I always felt that he was behind it as an opinion, and that either between somewhere in Westchester and or whether it was down in New Jersey, that he had something to do with it. I would never come off the fact that I always thought that he was a very strong person of interest and probably had something to do with it. But if we had never achieved conclusive evidence or any fact material, that could have helped me go forward.
So detectives, what I'm asking you is, would you agree that in order to get, quote, that material to help you go forward, that the prudent thing, once you came to that opinion, would have been to attempt to search the Westchester house either by consent or search warrant?
I don't know if the search warrant at that point for the Westchester house came into play, like I said, going back 35 years. I think I was more interested at that point in looking to get him indicted.
So detective,
At that point, what?
looking to get indicted.
Right.
So detective, you testified, page 148, you were here last time. I asked you, detective, isn't it true, this is on line 4, that during your original investigation, you became convinced during the original investigation, as you said before, that Kathie Durst never made it out of Westchester County? You answered that, to my belief, yeah. Do you recall testifying to that?
Again, about the search warrant?
Listen to that. I asked you, isn't it true that back during your original investigation, that you became convinced during that original investigation, as you said before, that Kathie Durst never made it out of Westchester County? You answered that, to my belief, yeah. Do you recall testifying to that?
I may have said that, yes.
And is that, in fact, was that your opinion?
Yeah, it could be an opinion, but it was still never based on fact.
Detective. So I've now gone through what are basically 4 prerequisites now. 1, that you caught Bob Durst on the lies about the marriage and where he was the night that Kathie allegedly disappeared. Agreed?
Okay.
So in the end, at that point in your investigation, you were aware of those 4 facts that I've now pointed out, and you still made the determination at that point not to attempt to search the house either by consent or warrant, correct?
Based on my memory at this point, it was not done. And I can't tell you in total context why it wasn't.
Okay, so detective, do you agree that not doing that, and I'm again not asking you at the beginning of your investigation, because you testified that you couldn't search the house on February 8th because at that point in time, I still thought that she made it back to Manhattan. Do you recall that testimony you gave?
Yes.
So detective, you're now to the point in your investigation you're aware that these are more facts. So my question is, why can't you simply tell us, you know what, I made a mistake and I should have, even if I hadn't already searched the house, at that point in time, I should have had a team sent out to that house and had it taken apart.
Sounds real good in hindsight.
So detective, does that mean that you are conceding, detective? I'm not asking about hindsight. I'm saying, do you agree that at that point in time in the original investigation, when you knew those four things that I've now pointed out, do you agree that it was a mistake for you not to have attempted to have that house searched?
No.
And it's lunchtime. Okay, we're going to recess for lunch. We're to return at 1:30 p.m. Great to see you. Detective, please resume the stand. First, Mr. Durst. Mr. DeGuerin, Mr. Redding, Ms. May. Mr. Lewin, Mr. Marion, Mr. Crosby. All right, you remain under oath. Detective, you may continue with your cross-examination.
Detective Struk, the three issues that we have discussed, Detective Struk, four issues we have discussed as mistakes. You are aware of those four issues. I don't need to go through them, correct?
Yes.
I just want to ask you, would you agree that none of those mistakes, or whatever else you would want to call them, occurred because of a lack of manpower on your side?
I disagree.
Okay, please explain.
Early on in the extension of that case or any case, it's always flooded with manpower. We usually do. If you look over the life of this case, probably most cases that are considered cold cases, it dwindles down to from, at one time we may have had 50 guys on this case with crime scenes and whatnot. And probably near the end it's down to either one or two.
Well, when you say the end, detective, my question is hypothetically, if you had decided, you, Michael Struk, decides, I want to search that house either through a consent search or by writing a warrant, would you agree that you would have been able to get the manpower to do it?
I would petition for it, alternate guy.
Detective, have you stated before to anybody that because of who the defendant was, that you had the manpower that you needed on this case? Have you ever said that?
I don't recall that.
Would that be true or false statement?
I don't recall it.
It's not what I'm asking you.
Well, I could have said it 3 weeks ago. I don't remember saying it and or when.
Okay, listen to my question.
I did.
Would it be a true statement, detective? Now, I'm not asking whether you said it, I'm saying, would it be a true statement? I had all the manpower I needed on this case to investigate the areas I felt needed investigating. True or false?
I just can't answer that true or false.
Why?
Oh, because I don't have first of all, a clear recollection of how every part of that case went 35 years ago, nor do I recall exactly when there was a need for manpower and whether or not it would have been available.
Detective,
I don't determine the manpower. I could ask for it, but I don't determine the manpower.
you previously conceded that there were, at points in this case, in upwards of 10 different NYP detectives working on the case, correct?
Yes, initially, yes.
So, detective, would you agree that you not asking Dr. Cooperman certain questions, that was not due to a lack of manpower, correct?
No, that had nothing to do with manpower.
Would you agree that you not going and having individuals go to the train station and talk to passengers and employees, that was not a lack of manpower?
That's correct.
Would you agree that you not having the South Salem house searched during the entire of your investigation was not because of a lack of manpower?
Again, difficult to answer that with a yes or no question. It would be what was discussed with my superiors and or through the district attorney's office.
So detective, isn't it correct that if you had had a conversation with the district attorney's office about a request you had made to search Bob Durst's house, you would have expected that that would have been documented in your notes, correct?
No.
So detective, you're saying that if you would have come to the DA's office and said, listen, I want to search this house, and they said, you know what, we're not even trying to get the search warrant, that you would not have documented that in your notebook, or if nothing else, to at least cover your ass?
Well, if I went there specifically asking for it at any time, and if it was denied, perhaps it would be in there. But in general conversations with the DA, I don't make any notations to that.
I'm not talking about a general conversation, detective. I am asking you to simply concede, very simply, that in the end, the reason that you did not search Bob Durst's house in South Salem was because you decided it was not a pertinent thing to do. That's a yes or no answer.
Again, I did not make that decision.
You're the lead detective in the case.
Yes.
Are you aware, detective, of your supervisor at NYPD telling you, detective, we're not going to allow you to search the house?
No, it never came to anybody saying to me, you're not allowed. Again, I'll go back to when I met with Lowell and the rest of the troopers up there, and it just apparently at that point did not seem worthy of going forward with that.
Detective, so listen to my question.
I do.
You are explaining why it is that you decided not to search the house. I'm not asking you that. I'm simply asking you to declare that for whatever reasons I had, whatever it was based on, I made the decision not to have that house searched. Correct or incorrect?
I suppose when you say that it was a collective decision,
Yes, sir.
that means that it's not your decision.
Your Honor, when I go to another command and I'm in their house, I don't tell them what to do. I could ask, we confer, and jointly one would expect that veteran detectives would get together and say, yeah, let's knock this one over or go forward. That's the only way I'm trying to answer Mr. Lewin, with all respect.
Okay.
But a yes or no answer, I
So,
see.
so the suggestion though is that, by Mr. Lewin, is that had you taken the initiative to pursue this investigative route, they would have perhaps agreed or followed. So is that not fair to suggest that you since you initiated the missing persons, not initiated, but since you were the lead on the missing persons investigation, that they might defer to you, and in some sense you were the leader of this?
Well,
Let's set aside for a moment, because I understand what you're saying about the nature of your investigation, what you believed at the time, the lack of evidence possibly to support a search warrant at that particular time. You've given me various explanations, yet you've not personally taken responsibility for a decision to go forward. And I think that's what Mr. Lewin is getting at. And perhaps that's never, though you've given these explanations, which certainly make sense to me, they don't directly answer the question that Mr. Lewin has posed to you.
if I thought at the time that it was worth it, and I made a demand or a serious request of the state police, I assume they'd acquiesce to that.
So I think the problem is that you feel and have testified that you had good reason not to, or it might not have occurred to you to do such a thing. Nevertheless, the question that Mr. Lewin is pursuing was to suggest that you chose not to pursue that. And I think that that's the question, and it hasn't exactly been answered, because in each case you're explaining why, as if you needed to explain. I don't think you need to explain. So, and in fact you have explained, that's on the record. So if we could focus on that, I think we get past this and move to other issues.
That's what I'm trying to.
Okay. Okay, so will you
Yes.
phrase that in a way that is,
So Detective, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about February 8th, when you ended up having what you described as a meeting with the New York State Police. I'm talking about later in your investigation, when you had come to the opinion that Kathie Durst had been killed by Bob Durst in Westchester County. Do you agree, Detective, that you made the decision, for whatever reason, not to search the South Salem house?
Again, we keep coming back to when I feel he killed her. I always felt that he was behind it, and at what juncture you keep looking for, I don't recall when this occurred.
That was the detective, it's not the question yet.
Okay.
Just listen please to my question. At a certain point, I'm not asking when that point is, you testified, at some point during the investigation, you came to the opinion, your word, that Bob Durst was responsible for Kathleen Durst's disappearance and death, and that had taken place in Westchester County. So I'm talking about at that point in time, isn't it true that you still at that point made the decision not to attempt to search the Westchester house, South Salem house?
Mr. Lumen, you yourself just said Westchester County. If he killed this woman, he could have killed her in the backyard or across the street or in a car going to a train station. I don't know. I never had the benefit of those facts.
Detective, but don't you get the benefit of those facts by, for instance, examining the house, going to the train station, interviewing the house?
House was examined.
Huh? What's that?
An officer had gone into the house.
An officer, a trooper detective with no forensic training had walked into a house and told you that he did not see a dead body, in essence, or a bunch of blood. Do you think that's the same as a search?
I certainly relied on that at the time.
So, detective,
You want to call that a mistake? So be it.
no, I'm asking, would you call it a mistake?
No.
All right, I'm going to move on. I'm going to mark People's One-on-One. Detective, have you ever seen this before? I'm going to get focused here. Have you ever seen this before?
Yes.
That is what is commonly called within this case the dig note. Am I correct, Detective?
I've never heard that term.
You don't know this as the dig note. That's not a term you're familiar with.
No.
Do you agree in looking at it, it appears to say town dump, bridge, dig, boat, other, shovel, check, car, truck rentals? Do you believe that's what it appears to say?
Yes.
Detective, are you aware of where this note was allegedly found?
Offhand, no.
Detective, do you recall being advised by either Mary Hughes, Geraldine McInerney, or DeGuerin Johnny, that this note had been found in the trash at the South Salem residence?
Could have been.
Detective, do you recall being advised of this during your original investigation?
I assume at some point.
Okay, so detective, would you agree when you look at this note, detective, and you're told that it was found in the trash at Bob Durst's South Salem house, is there anything about that note to you that as a detective says, you know what, there might be some evidentiary significance?
Like anything else, it could be.
Well, when you say it could be, tell me what is it about this note that leads you to believe that it might ask for evidentiary significance?
You got town dumps and bridges, digging, boats, that's not inside his own house.
Detective, did that appear to you to list of, in essence, how to get rid of a body.
Well, you could interpret that.
Well, detective, was the fact that this was found in the house where Kathie Durst was last seen by Bob Durst, did that have any significance to you about where your crime scene might have been?
Well, it certainly could be.
Well, detective, would you agree that looking at this note, and if you're told it's brought to you, and you are told it was found in the trash of the house, that it appears to be, as a detective, an individual making a list of how to get rid of a body?
You could think that that's what it is, and it may be, but
What did you think?
I thought it was interesting, now that I'm looking at it.
Well, when you say you thought it was interesting, what does that mean, you thought it was interesting? Please explain.
Just again, I'm explaining to you something that was perhaps shown to me many years ago. It is interesting. It's not conclusive in its own right, but it is worthy of thought, yeah.
So, detective, at this point in time, it would appear, around this time, you've already caught Bob Durst on 2 different lies. The state of the marriage, actually, the fact that there's domestic violence, which he didn't admit to. You caught him lying about his alibi. You acknowledge now at this point that at least sometime during the investigation, you began to believe that Kathie Durst never made it out of Westchester. So my question is, once you got that note, shouldn't the first thing you should have done is to go, you know what, I gotta thoroughly search that house?
Again, I can't sitting here today tell you exactly why I did or did not do every single aspect of the case.
Detective, I'm not asking about every single aspect of the case. I'm asking you very, very plainly.
And I'm doing my best.
So listen, I'm not asking you to talk about everything you do in the case. I'm saying, here's an example of what you have conceded appears to look like a plan to get rid of a body. And it's found the last place that Kathie Durst was seen by an individual who's lied to you about repeated instances. And you're saying, well, I don't really know at the time what I would have thought. Detective, isn't it true that once you see this note, certainly with this, you got to be going, I got to search that house, correct?
It's fair to say that it is an interesting document.
Okay, and it also, I'm sorry, thank you, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm done.
Would it also be fair to say, detective, that you know what? Looking back, it was a mistake, once I was made aware of this document, not to have searched that house.
Sitting here today, that probably, sitting here today knowing all that has transpired over the years, that probably would have been a good thing to do.
That's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you with what you knew at that time. And again, detective, this is what you said you knew. You knew Bob Durst has lied to you about where he was the night of the murder. You know he's lied to you about the statute of marriage. You know he's lied to you about the existence of domestic violence. You know that you now found this note in Westchester County. It's been presented to you as being in the garbage of the house where Kathie was last seen. And you're telling me that you wouldn't have known at that time?
Who retrieved this?
Detective, I want you to assume for a moment that Mary Hughes, Gilberta DeJami, or Geraldine McInerney presented you, told you about this note, told you they found it during the pendency of your investigation. As you sit here today, are you saying that didn't happen?
No, I'm not saying that.
And in fact, detective, as you're sitting here, correct, you are recognizing this note.
I do I do recall the note now. I mean, I'm looking at it, it looks familiar.
Detective, here's what I'm asking you, and this goes to a lot of questions. I'm asking you if you can look back and you can say, listen, based on what I knew then, I made this mistake, or I didn't make a mistake. So it's very simple. This is the question. So now, based, you have this note, you have Bob Durst's lies. Do you agree that it was a mistake back in 1982 when you got this note to have not immediately attempted to search the South Salem house?
Sitting here today, it would appear to be a mistake, yes.
Will you concede, Detective, that it should have been considered a mistake, not doing it even at the time? Will you agree to that?
It would depend on when that came in. It would depend on review with the team, the bosses, whatever. Again, I'm sitting here many years later. Why it wasn't acted upon by me or all these other people that you have mentioned, I really don't recall it.
But at least, Detective, you are conceding that had you been presented with that note sometime in 1982, that you cannot explain why you wouldn't have at that point gone and attempted to search the South Salem house. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's fair.
And you have also said, correct, that had you known that Dr. Cooperman back then, had you known back then, had you asked him the questions of, did you know what Kathie's voice sounded like, had you ever spoken to her on the phone, etc., that would have changed, given the answers that were represented that you gave, your belief in the accuracy of the idea that Kathie Durst had made the call to Einstein. Is that correct?
Mr. Lewin, we're back to Lewin. We're back to Cooperman again. And my prior testimony, I don't remember all my exact words, was that I was comfortable with the fact that he knew who he was speaking to. When a doctor says to me, yeah, I spoke to Kathie Durst, for me to memorialize the word, every single word and how he describes it, you're never going to find that in my notes like that.
But Detective, again, in last time you were in court, you conceded that, you know what, I did not ask Dr. Cooper those questions. That's what you conceded. Do you recall that?
Yes, I conceded the questions that you put forward. Did I ask him X, Y, and Z?
And you didn't.
Well, I may not have asked it exactly how you put it to me, but I could have asked him 25 different ways.
Detective, isn't it true that what happened is that when Dr. Cooperman said Kathie Durst called, it didn't occur to you at the time, not that you were maliciously doing something, not that you had any evil intent, but isn't it true that it just didn't occur to you to ask him, well, doctor, how do you know it was her? Did you recognize her voice? How many times you spoken to her? You agree it did not occur to you to ask those questions, correct?
Mr. Lewin, once again, when I went up, I spoke on the phone once or twice to these people between Cooperman, then went up to Einstein, met with these people. Who else were we talking about? The issue was, did he speak to her that day and her diarrhea and that she was distraught over this and that, whatever? I came away believing that he knew who the hell he was talking to.
Detective, nobody is arguing that you did not come away sincerely believing that Dr. Cooperman talked to Kathie. My question is that once you agree that you came away with that opinion because certain questions weren't asked specifically, did you recognize her voice? How many times have you spoken to her before? How do you know it was her on the phone? Isn't that correct,
Mr. Lewin, all those things could have occurred. I don't know. But like I say, I have to always fall back on the fact that I feel comfortable in my capacity asking this man, this doctor, He knew who he was talking to. How I said it to him, or how I broke it down, I don't remember.
Detective, I'm gonna try it one more time here.
Okay.
Detective, I want you to assume the following hypothetical. I want you to assume that Dr. Cooperman was spoken to by investigators in 2015. That they asked Dr. Cooperman those 3 questions that you didn't ask him. And that the answers that he gave were number 1, I've only spoken to her a few times. B, I don't know her voice. C, I've never spoken to her on the phone. And D, I thought it was Kathie Durst because the person's calling me on the phone saying it's Kathie Durst. Why would I think otherwise? I want you to assume that those are the answers that Dr. Cooperman gave. Had he given you answers like that in 1982, you certainly would have documented them, correct?
You put forward specific questions that should have been asked. What I'm saying to you, and we've been through this a dozen times, I could have asked him those questions. Now, the fact that he comes forward 10, 15 years later and comes off his statement, because maybe he's embarrassed or for whatever, that's not out of my, I can't answer for why he thinks something's so different later after all that's been in the press and in the media.
Detective, when he was
I believe that he knew who the heck he was talking to.
because you didn't ask him why.
You don't know that.
You testified you didn't ask him why, Detective.
No, you asked me, did I ask him certain questions, and I've told you over and over, I don't remember all the questions.
Okay.
Why was I there?
Detective, so, are you still going to stick with the premise that, you know what, you did not make a mistake by not specifically asking Dr. Cooperman those questions? That's a yes or a no? Yes. Thank you. I'll move on. We talked about the location of where you came to believe Kathie Durst's body was. Do you recall saying the following? Regardless of the murder venue, she was 95% disposed of down the Jersey Shore.
Possible.
Well, that's from, I can show you, it's from your notes at LAPA 4801 and 4802. Do you want me to show that to you?
Just tell me when I said it and where.
So, Detective, LAPA base stamp 4801, 4802. You said, regardless of the murder venue, she was 95% disposed of down the Jersey Shore. I want you to, for a moment, I want you to accept that you wrote that. I can take out the writing strip, but I'm asking you to accept that you wrote it. Assuming you wrote it, tell me what you meant by that.
Well, let's assume that she met her demise wherever, Westchester, New York, or whatnot, in February. The most likely place to dispose of somebody would be down in the Sandy area, okay, which would have been down in the Long Beach Island or down that neck of the woods where you could dig. There was no way you could dig with a frost mine up in Westchester County during that weather span.
Detective, when you said,
So that's where I probably put forward that opinion.
when you said, Detective, right now, testimony 2 weeks ago, you said that at one point you did not believe that you even had the venue because she was killed in Westchester. Now you just in your answer mentioned New York, which I assume you mean New York City. Do you recall both of those statements?
I remember statements, questions, where wasn't it more in the realm of an opinion that I thought that something had happened to her?
Yeah, Detective.
Sitting here today?
Detective, what I'm asking you is, you came to the opinion during the investigation. You testified this already. You said, at a point in time, I came to the opinion that Bob Durst was responsible for her disappearance and death, and that it had happened in Westchester County, and I didn't have venue. Do you recall
Yes.
testifying to that?
I do remember saying that.
And that is your opinion, correct?
Opinion,
And
yes.
that was your opinion during the investigation, correct?
Opinion, yeah.
As you sit here today, Detective, with everything that you know today, do you have an opinion as to whether or not Kathie Durst made it back to the Riverside Drive penthouse as Mr. Durst has stated?
Today, sitting here today, it would seem unlikely.
Well, Mr. DeGuerin asked you, if you can recall, Mr. DeGuerin asked you if the jewelry being found in Kathie's drawer at the Riverside Drive penthouse, Mr. DeGuerin said, isn't that even more of an indication that Kathie made it to Manhattan? You responded, that's what it appears to be. Yes, yeah. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
Detective, do you agree that Mr. DeGuerin in that question was suggesting to you that the jewelry being found in the penthouse meant that Kathie made it back there on January 31st?
I think that was the purpose of his question. And to be fair to answer, the fact that the jewelry was there does not mean that she brought it there or somebody else.
I'm getting that. Detective, do you know, as you sit here today, do you know how those earrings made it back to Riverside Drive penthouse?
No, I don't.
Now, you are aware, Detective, as you sit here, that Mr. Durst has lied to you about numerous things in this case, correct?
There's certainly been inconsistencies, yes.
Well, the other day, you said inconsistency, they were lies.
Same thing, but
Well, an inconsistency, Detective, has the idea that maybe it's unintentional, etc. Isn't it correct, Detective, that your belief is that Robert Durst lied to you about the status of his marriage?
yeah, I guess you could interpret it was a lie or an inconsistency. You know, early, look, I'm not trying to sway off anything like that. Early on, an inconsistency or a lie, I mean, it's like balls in the air. Until you can prove it or you have a reason to check on somebody's veracity or honest statement, yeah, it's...
So, Detective, he tells you that first night that he and Kathie have a good marriage, correct? Correct?
Yes.
You find out that first night, Detective, that he's physically abusing her, correct?
The first night?
Yes, Detective, you find out on the 5th, you get the first report that Bob Durst has been physically violent with his wife.
Okay.
Is that a yes, correct?
If that's what I wrote, then yeah, then that would be true.
And Detective, you continue to get a bunch of subsequent reports that Mr. Durst was physically violent with his wife, correct?
Correct.
So, Detective, would you agree then that when Mr. Durst told you, I have a good marriage with my wife, and you're finding out that he is beating her, according to numerous people, that you would characterize that as a detective as a lie?
That would be fair to say, yes.
Right. You also, Detective, were told that first night, Bob Durst gave you a timeline of where he was. And he told you that after he dropped her off, he had drinks with the Mayors. Within 5 days, Detective, you agreed, you went and interviewed the Mayors, and they told you they never had drinks with him that night, correct?
I believe that would be in my notes. Yeah.
So, Detective, I showed you the notes last time. Do I need to take it out, or do you agree that, in fact, that's what you were told?
I did not disagree with you, just
Right. So, Detective, would you further agree that Mr. Durst telling you 4 days after it happened, it's 5 days, excuse me, that he came home and he had drinks with the Mayors, and that you interviewed the Mayors and them telling you that never happened, would you call that a misrecollection or a lie?
Either or.
Well, Detective, you said that you have to look at total of everything, how it's coming together. So, Detective, by the way, when a woman disappears, Detective, who's the first person you look at?
Spouse.
So, Detective, you have the spouse who's the last person with her. You already said you were suspicious that he waited the 4 to 5 days to report her missing, correct?
I don't know if I said that. What I said was that his initial, when you talk about the night when he came in and reported her missing? Now, did he give you an explanation where she would stay out several days because of clinics? So that seemed reasonable at that point.
And Detective, you also said that he sounded like he was ordering a sandwich.
Well, it was kind of nonchalant, that's for sure.
Detective, is there a point?
Your Honor, I have it at 4:30. Is this a good time to stop?
It is a perfect time to stop. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to come back tomorrow at 9 o'clock for more of the examination of Detective Struk, but we're nearing the end of it.
I know the court and the jury were disappointed, but we're going to be interrupting Detective Struk to put on a live witness.
Yes, I know that there is a witness who will be called out of order, so we will continue with Detective Struk after we hear from another witness. Ladies and gentlemen, do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. Do not talk about it or about any of the people or any subject involved in it with anyone, including the other jurors. Do not make up your mind about the verdict or any issue until after you've discussed the case with the other jurors during deliberations. No tweeting, Facebook, or social media. 9 o'clock tomorrow. We will see you and do our best to start right at 9. Our jurors have left the courtroom. Mr. Chesnoff?
Yes, before we resume Detective Struck's testimony, could the court remind the jury that the questions of the lawyer is not evidence? Because of the fact that this is not in a typical situation with objections and rulings, this seems to flow continuously, but there are repeated statements of Mr. Lewin's vision of the facts in order to elicit answers. I'm not quarreling with his leading, but I think it's important, since it's so repetitive and uninterrupted, for the jury to be reminded that his questions aren't the evidence.
Neither are Mr. DeGuerin's questions to this witness. I don't want to call attention to this as if I disagree with these questions. So I'm not inclined to do that. I did notice one discrepancy. There's a point at issue about whether or not Mr. Mayor acknowledged. I think he did he did say that there were no drinks, and then after some cross-examination, he finally said because in a document it was reported that he said that he had drinks. He conceded that. I'm not sure that was.
And the people stipulated that.
That is actually, that's not correct. What he said was, there were never any drinks. He said that on February 3rd, which is not the same date, he had invited Mr. Durst over for drinks, and
Okay,
Mr. Durst
well,
said he had a cold.
I think there's a discrepancy there, and yes, the questions of the lawyers are not evidence. How often do I have to tell him that? I've told him that twice already,
Well,
3 times.
The only reason I'm
Say
asking,
something about how it's outrageously repetitious.
What's
I
that?
don't know how many times it's gone. I'm angry right now, and I guess you can tell that by my tone of voice. But if he's asked those questions once, he's asked them at least 15 times, and I objected.
Well, it was cross-examination. It was perfectly proper. There's nothing wrong with it.
Perfectly acceptable to repeat it that often, Judge?
Yes.
There was also a
outrageous.
stipulation regarding the testimony, which counsel signed after reviewing.
Yeah, I'm sorry you're angry. I mean, this witness is not good for the defense.
Your
Yes.
Honor, the only reason it comes up is this is a very artificial approach to a jury trial. And as a result, the asked and answered questions are repetitive, the same thing, and it's not as though the witness isn't answering, it's just that Mr. Lewin doesn't always like the answer.
Well, I think he's not answering, and even if he were answering, it can be repeated because, particularly with this kind of a witness, that's the point. I like the authority of Jefferson on evidence, and he points out the value of repeated questions at certain times with certain witnesses on cross-examination. It's a cross-examination technique, I am not satisfied personally that he did answer the questions. I don't think he answered the questions, so Mr. Lewin did not let go. He didn't let go until he had the answer that he wanted, and I don't think the witness ever said something that he didn't believe in response. I don't think he would have given it up until the question was narrowed sufficiently or repeated, rephrased. That's just my assessment of the testimony. I think it is. I understand why you're objecting, but
I wasn't, all I wanted you to do was instruct the jury that these questions aren't evidence, Your Honor.
yep, no, they're not. Okay.
8:30, Your Honor, correct?
Department 81. Oh, do you have an issue for tomorrow then?
No, they do, they said at 8:30. They wanted, I thought the court said 8:30. They said they had the issue they wanted to bring up regarding the elevator operators again, so.
Oh, that's what it is? Okay, well, I just didn't know what it was. All right, let's adjourn, let Rona stop this.
Did you want to say 8:30 or 8:45 on that one, Your Honor?
Well, we'll try for 8:30. Is Mr. Durst gonna be there, or is he
I'll
gonna
be
wait?
here.
I'm here at 8:30 every morning.
Okay.
I'll be here.
Okay, we're all here. I'd like to get it done at 8:30. Thank you. Department 81's, or 81 in absentia, sitting in Department 1. Adjourned.